Well, we had the opportunity to go to Kerygma, and that's where you've spent a couple of years, have you not?
3 years.
3 years. Are you going back next time? I think
I
Ashley and I
am.
will be there.
I will be there. I can't wait. It's my
Can't wait.
favorite event of the year. I love it.
We can't wait.
Yeah.
Because I think we're going to be there as well. And you started talking about something that really, as you said a minute ago, blew your hair back. It blew my hair back, and that's it looks like it's blown back all the time. You started talking about narrative identity theory.
Yeah.
Okay. So for those that are not familiar with that, I want you to kind of share from your heart what that is. Okay.
Okay. Well, I just want to say for the listeners of this podcast that it's a real pleasure for me to get to join. And I just feel like my heart is so in alignment with the way that the two of you want to put God first. And so it is a pleasure for me to get to just hang with y'all. And I hope that there's a lot of hang with y'all in my future.
There will be, don't you worry.
No doubt.
Don't you worry. And
Right.
I want to preface this too. So like, just to give you an idea, people that listen to, this podcast and know Leslie and I, and they're like, we can just totally picture you doing this. But when we're at Kerygma, just to set this precedence, right? Because when I read what you're going to kind of talk about, I was like, that's going to be so over my head. There's no way. Like I looked at Leslie, I'm like, I can't go in there. Like I'm going to be like, I'm so lost. But for anybody that's thinking what you just said the title of this is, like, it will blow your mind, but it's also, you do such a good job in the way that you communicate it and the way that you explain it. I was sitting there, I looked at Leslie, I'm like, this is one of the best things I think I've ever heard. I mean, the way that you explained it. So I'm saying that to anybody that's listening and you're like, what did they just say? I promise you're going to want to keep continuing to listen to this because she got some really good stuff to say. And you do such a good job at it. So I can't wait.
Yes,
You're
you
great.
do. At Kerygma 2024, not to forget the question I asked you, because we're talking about narrative identity theory. You started talking about, you did a presentation on the science of story support.
Yes.
Okay. So when I walked into your class, I was so excited to learn how you can use someone's story and their narrative identity. And I just thought, okay, because I'm going into counseling, but beside that, everybody has a story.
Yes.
And how they share it and how we receive it and what we do with it is what makes it's the jam between the bread.
Without it, it's not a sandwich.
Not a sandwich. It's just boring.
There we go.
So the
All right.
story is what does it, but I want you to break. So we got a lot to talk about. So
We
I
do.
hope you just X'd out your calendar for like 4 hours. And I want you to talk about that science of story, support, and report. Okay. Start there. And then let's talk about narrative identity, how that works. Okay.
Okay. We'll start there. So hopefully it's not shocking that I will utilize my own story first, and then we'll talk about theory. And hopefully by the end of this episode, every listener will just think that theory is the best thing in the world. But for my part, I would say that stories have been my passion for my entire life. I have used them to grow in the Lord. I have used them to escape from my own pain. I have used them to help other people become professional in their ministry vocation. So this theme of narrative, the theme of story, is so prominent in my own just sort of being in the world, even from being a little kid. And it was revolutionary for me to think less about the Bible as a doctrinal textbook and more about the Bible as a story that leads us to the goodness of God expressed in Jesus, and a story that assures us that in his time that God will make everything right. So then, I started realizing I can locate myself, my highs and lows, my joys and sufferings in the story that God is telling in the world. So I think that's the most basic way for us to introduce thinking of our lives as narrative processes, that every one of us is living in a story, whether we recognize it or not. But if we can recognize the stories that we are telling ourselves, if we can look for the story that God wants to tell through our life individually and communally, always want to think about the story of the community alongside individual. We're not always awesome at that in the culture to which I belong. So, Leslie, you brought in one of my favorite ideas, which is the concept of narrative identity theory. So, the first thing we would say about narrative identity theory, and again, I'm claiming this through an understanding of Christian faith, and that's not necessarily the underpinnings of the theory. It's a psychological theory. So we're doing some integrative work here between faith and psych. We would say that we are ready for vocabulary. We are hermeneutical beings. So what's a hermeneutic? A hermeneutic is a way to make meaning. So when we do something like preaching or teaching, and we call that a hermeneutics class, we are carefully considering how we arrive at meaning from a text. In seminary, we're talking about making meaning from the text of the Bible, but we are always making meaning. We cannot help ourselves. We are wired to make meaning. The thing that precedes the meaning making is the story that we are telling ourselves. So if we center down in that place where we are telling ourselves a story, whether we realize it or not, here's what narrative identity theory would tell us is happening. We all are living inside a story. It's iterative, meaning that there's a new story after every human encounter. Every time we don't want to imagine that this is just something that happens cognitively or intellectually or only happens like in our prefrontal cortex. Our whole body is contributing to the story that we're telling ourselves. So it's internalized and it's evolving. It's not static. Even over the course of our conversation today, our narrative identity will have a new iteration. And it has 3 components. We call it the reconstructed past. So you'll see it's not just the past, it's the reconstructed past. So none of us just remembers the facts, right? Our memory is doing all kinds of work when we bring our story alive in us. We're working to get a hold of it. So our remembered past or reconstructed past combined with our imagined future. So what are the possibilities for me? What are the limitations for me based on the story that I'm telling myself? Those 2 things come together to make meaning in the present. So the components are past, future, present. That's a person's narrative identity. And there are so many amazing things that are coming out in the literature on this. One of them that is, I think, particularly important for me as a person who is a professional chaplain and also teaching ministers and therapists what to do with this is the idea that I wish this weren't true, but it's true. And it's important to know. And that's that hard stories, like the painful experiences that live in our reconstructed past, like stories about grief or shame or trauma or abuse or neglect or suffering, like those kinds of stories have far greater potential to shape our narrative identity than positive and pleasant and affirming stories. So it's such a careful way to think about how we become who we are, and just the knowledge for all of us who look at other people and see someone made in the image of God, and we want to treat every person with human dignity and loving kindness and respect. We want to remember that the hard things that we've experienced are more muscular than the great affirming things that we've experienced. So let me stop there and see where you want to go.
I wrote down that both of those things circle together, and you're right. The past and the projected future then becomes our present. So those things circle together. Is that correct? And becomes our present. And I also wrote the way that we tell our stories makes us who we are. So I think you shared that probably in class because I jotted that down. So the way we tell our stories makes us who we are. Speak to that and kind of what you mean by that. I mean, I know what I took from that, but I want to hear what you mean by that.
I kind of want to hear what you took from it first, but you can decide because it's your show.
It's your show. Welcome to the
We did it. Oh boy. Okay.
here.
Okay.
Ashley, handshake on it.
Yeah.
Give a little handshake on it. Okay, boom. There.
Okay.
It's Eva's
Yeah.
show now. All right.
Lord help us.
So you
Okay.
tell me the way we tell our stories makes us who we are.
Yeah.
And then what I want to do is I'll give you a glimpse into what I want to do next. And that is talking about the way we listen to others and how that co-creates our story. And remember,
Yes.
we getting wavy and it's all intertwining together, right?
It is
So,
very intertwined. Okay, so we're going to talk about how we tell our stories, or
and
maybe
how that
even
makes us who we are.
right in there is how we don't tell our stories also can make us who we are. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Then we'll talk about the power of the listener, because those two things, you can't have one without the other. So this concept of narrative identity is deeply reliant on community. Our story, there is a way in which our stories do not even become perceivable to us without someone else to listen to them. So this process of narration, of me telling someone else the hard stuff, is identity forming. That gives us the next iteration of our narrative identity. So, excuse me, when I say the way we tell our stories makes us who we are, and also not telling our stories also makes us who we are. I'll just grab one of my favorite theorists in this arena. His name is Dory Laub. Dorilaub. So here's something that's really important to me. When I grab a name out of the ether, I want people to know who I'm talking about and to approach that author's story with something that I call a hermeneutic of love. So why would we care what Dory Laub says about telling our hard stories? Well, it's because that was his lived experience, and he carried it into a career of psychoanalysis and advocacy for people who had lived through the Holocaust and moved to North America.
Okay.
So he and his mother were the only members of their family to survive the Holocaust, and they came to the United States. And he dedicated not just his therapeutic endeavor, but really his whole life to seeking wholeness for people who had been through one of the most extraordinary traumas of the 20th century. Right. I don't want to exclude equally horrifying things that have happened on the African continent and in parts of Asia. My own education has privileged the European experience, and so I know more about the Nazi Holocaust than some of the African civil wars and places where the trauma is equally on par with what happened under the Third Reich. Okay, so Dr. Laub has this language for the needfulness to tell a hard story, that there is this unbelievable burden of an untold story that lives both in our intellect and in our physical person. We can hear a little bit of this in the way that we talk about bearing witness to a story, that we talk about it the same way that we talk about lifting a weight or pulling something heavy, that we bear witness to a difficult story. And that language of witnessing was very central to Dory Laub's work. So he would say that a person who's carrying a difficult narrative is locked in unreality. So just the condition of holding a story that feels like it will so the story, the narrative identity for a person in this experience might be something like, if I even try to put language to what I've experienced, it will destroy me. Never mind my listener, who also might, explode into
That's what I'm saying.
particulate matter. But even if I do this rigorous, costly task of reaching for language that matches what I have endured, I will be destroyed by telling my own tale. So the work of reaching into the self to honor a difficult story, a traumatic story, perhaps. Just the effort there is monumental, and it cannot be effective without that person who's willing to bear the story. So I think maybe one of the points that is so beloved to me within this theoretical framework that stuck out to you when we were in the same room in Nashville is this idea that narration is really the way out. of that isolation and unhealed state. And so then this is where the witness or the receiver of the story has more power than we, or I don't need to speak for the entire nation, than I, the witness, the receiver of the story has so much more power than I was aware of. So I'll say, hold me to it. I'll say a little bit about how much strength the listener has in these encounters, but I just want to tag back to sort of what is convincing to me about the theory. It's all peer-reviewed journal articles, scientific la-di-da. And part of the reason that I trust it so much is that I lived in the proof. So for about 10 years, I was a hospital chaplain, level 1 trauma, acute care, bedside care. And what I found when I was doing that work, first of all, is that chaplaincy is deeply reliant on narrative, that if it is being done well and ethically, we're centering the patient's story, whatever needs to be told. And what I found with my hospitalized patients is that the experience of isolation and of fear and change, the basic frustration of being hospitalized, often returned them to something else equally difficult in their story. And so, I mean, I've had thousands of conversations about cancer and diabetes and limited physical mobility and those sorts of things. And then an equal number of conversations that came alive during the time of hospitalization. And I can't tell you, my friends, how often in those years of clinical work, someone started a paragraph, something like, "Chaplain, I've never told anyone this before, but dot, dot, dot." And then we would go hard into the kind of story that we're pointing at with Dory Lobb's work, like this thing that has felt like more than could be borne by a listener. And then it would come out in the pastoral care dyad. So what happens then, of course, is that now the person carrying that story is not isolated anymore. And the teller has at least one piece of evidence that that story can be co-labored, that it can be carried by someone else without creating destruction, that it actually, the telling, that narrative process can be the way to healing. So again, I'll pause and see. You want to talk about the listener? Or you want to say more?
That's what I was about to say. You know, you made a statement at Krigman. It said the quality of the listening impacts the wellness. And I wrote that in my book
That's
because
right.
we as listeners, and I wrote down on the side active listening with a little question mark, and I wrote feeling heard and a little question mark, because what you just talked about when you said co-labored and carried, we talk to people, and if they say Chaplain Eva or Leslie or Ashley or to whoever is listening, I've never shared this with anybody. If we're like, "Oh, well, okay, well, I'm listening."
Yeah.
You
That's
know what I'm
right.
saying?
Right. Yeah.
Or
Absolutely.
even this is my favorite.
Yes.
You know, and if we don't take with great responsibility what God gave us to come alongside and bear witness with them, oh my gosh, shame on us. We're going to get to heaven. Jesus is going to go, Les, you remember when so-and-so tried to tell you that story and you checked your phone 10 times to see what, you see what I'm saying? So you said the quality of the listening impacts the wellness.
That's
So
right.
if we take that to just a conversation with somebody, counseling is a conversation. If
Mhm.
we're at a restaurant with one of our friends and we're talking, but the quality of the listening is not very good, then their wellness is going to suffer because of that, because we're not, and stop me because you're the expert, we're not co-laboring or bearing witness or coming alongside them to help them with their identity through their narrative. Okay. And
Yes.
then you've also got the power of the receiver. What are we going to do when they trust us with this bomb that they're dropping?
Yes.
What I mean, and sometimes we have to take sometimes it gets real and we got to do some serious things with that. And we let them know that from the get go. But just everyday stuff that people tell us, the power that we have with that, if we mishandle it,
Mhm.
no, we can't. So can
Right.
you speak to the power of the receiver?
Yes. So I want to agree with you, Leslie,
Mm.
that the default way that we listen is in a distracted state. And that is doing damage. It is doing unquantifiable damage for us to, you name it, be looking at our phone, our smartwatch, scrolling while we're in a Zoom meeting, whatever it may be. There are consequences for how we listen. And they're not just for the teller of the story, they're for me as well. So I'll walk through a couple of steps that build on each other about the quality of the listening and how it affects wellness, healing, and narrative identity. The first point we might want to make is that the quality of listening actually influences the telling. So if someone comes to me and needs to share a burden of story that feels like it could destroy them, but I am distracted, this invisible thing is happening, and again, it may not even clock for us cognitively, but that person who comes to my office and needs to talk is instantly assessing how much burden of story I'm willing to take for her or him. So the teller is testing me. Can she take it? And is she willing to take it? Or is she too busy for me? Does she even care? So the first step is that the quality of listening influences the telling. So this suffering person who's desperate to be heard is testing the listener to see if she can take it, is willing to take it. So step one is the listening influences the telling. And again, so I'll just say this bears out in the data like this. If the teller suspects that what I want is actually just to have a fun, rollicking conversation, that I want to be entertained, then the teller will change her story, please me. Or if she senses that I am cranky, she might change her story to be cute and entertaining, funny. So something that's important to name here is that quite often, this is not always the case. Sometimes we have peer-to-peer conversations, but quite often in this listener-teller pairing, the listener-teller dyad, one person has more social power than the other, and it's usually the listener, right? It's the therapist or the pastor or the chaplain or the doctor who is the designated receiver of the story. So there's already a power differential. And so this person who feels isolated and crushed by the burden of story now is accounting for the perceived desire of the hearer. So it's on those of us who listen to signal intentionally that whatever needs to roll out in this dialogue, I am here for it. And it's also on the designated receiver of story to be willing to bear the cost of that. I think something that's missing from a lot of times the way that we train people in the helping professions, all the way across the helping professions, is that we do not emphasize that part of the work is being willing to suffer with the teller. That hearing the story will cost me something. I will carry it for the rest of my life. It may become part of my burden. So there's a whole lot more than I should say about this right at this point in time. But this sense of being willing to suffer with the teller is embedded in the work. So I want to sometimes explicitly say, you can say whatever you need to right now, anything you need to. You have agency. It's completely up to you what you share, but you don't have to censor yourself for my sake. Let me have it. So that signaling is really important. It happens invisibly. It happens very quickly. So the quality of my listening affects the story that gets told, but it also can determine what story gets silenced. And so then we've talked about narrative identity being iterative. So then the teller's new narrative identity is no one can handle what I need to say. I am more isolated than I was before. Not even my chaplain can handle what I need to say. Not even my professor is willing to let me share this thing that feels like it's going to kill me, right? So that's step one. And then the second sort of big thing that happens, I really just sort of explained it, is that there's a new narrative identity for the listener and the teller.
Mm-hmm.
So in this story that I'm telling where I've been a bad listener, we've said the story for the new narrative identity for the teller might be something like, I'm more alone than I even realized, because not even Chaplain Eva is willing to silence her phone so that I can tell her what happened to me. My new narrative identity might be incredibly wrong, but I might be very confident in a feeling of like, I can really cheer people up, right? Or like I can really point out the positive in this narrative of extraordinary suffering. So that's wrong. But then I start living out of that false narrative as a professional caregiver. So that's the second big move. And the thing to recognize, so let me just say, and Leslie, you might want to make a comment on this, but historically in the helping professions, especially in psychology, there was this idea that the listener was almost without personhood, sort of, or like that the listener was just carte blanche. Just this, it didn't even really matter as long as you showed up in the room. And the new data is more like it is the specific alchemy of that dyad. It is everything that the listener brings in with her that can be perceived by the teller, as well as the obvious need that the teller has brought into the situation with herself. It's that co-creative space, the place where those things get all swirled up together that determines the next iteration of narrative identity for both listener and teller. So I think there is a different kind of ethical burden on the listener under the narrative identity framework that is in perfect alignment with our responsibility to treat others as imago Dei and with the most powerful dignity that we can muster this side of the grave.
Mm-hmm.
So that's thing 2. And then should we pause? You want to say anything before
No, what I do want to say is, although you working at this professionally, we must like purple. Do you like purple? It doesn't matter. That's a side note. Purple. Look at me trying to put that in your screen. It will not go to Colorado. It's not going. Anyway, and of course I'll forget exactly what I'm saying. Oh, I'm back. I don't work at this I'm in ministry, okay?
Yeah.
And I have a degree in pastoral counseling. Beyond that, no. So I'm not licensed or anything like that. But shame on us that we can't sit at the coffee shop with a friend of ours and exercise this. So our listeners, although there may be some out there that do this professionally or whatever, the majority of this I want to be used by people that doggone want to sit at the dinner table and talk to their babies about what happened in high school or college that day. I need to hear your story now. And now I understand I'm getting off because a parent's going to listen differently than a friend or a chaplain or a this or that. You know what I'm saying? But
Yes.
I want just everyday people. I want Ashley to be able to come to me and say, I really got this thing I want to tell you.
Yes.
Well, I want to understand that from not professional Leslie and let me get my empathetic listening and active and get my counseling books out. No, Ashley, girl, what you got going on? Let's talk about it.
Yes.
So you said something at Kerygma that is when listening to a painful story.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the reason I know this is I'm looking at your presentation. Okay. So I'm going to remind you what you said if you didn't know on the top. Okay. Because I don't know what I say sometimes, like a few minutes ago. But anyway, when I'm listening to a painful story, a question I can ask, what am I actually doing?
Yes.
So what am I doing right now? What am I self-aware of what I'm doing right now? I think that's what that means. And the second thing is, how can what I'm doing glorify God? That's so good. I mean,
Well,
speak to that,
let's play with those 2 questions because
please.
they are so grounding. So, Leslie, I want to pick up what you were saying about that's my hope as well, that all family conversations, all best friend conversations could be like this. And so, and while I think it's probably already clear, a huge proponent of professional mental health care. If I could, by the end of my life, see meaningful change in the amount of guilt that people feel when they need a therapist, I would be so delighted by that.
Agree.
And most of our lives, we probably really just need brothers and sisters in Christ who know how to be our companions. So I want both things, right? People to know if they need professional mental healthcare, that so do I. And that is a blessing that we live in a time that that's available to us. And also, this is the job of the body of the Lord, for us to be capable of bearing witness to each other that way. So we always want to ask, where does my story need to be witnessed? And am I willing to bear witness to other stories? Those two questions are really important. So when we're asking, what am I doing while I am receiving a difficult story, there are, I don't know, 5 million good ways to answer that. But let's just have one.
Let's just start with one.
So this concept comes from another person that has blessed my understanding so deeply. He has died. His name was James Dittus, Dittes. And he taught pastoral theology. And he also, again, why would I trust what Dr. Dittus says about this? Because he suffered over many years with a degenerative neurological condition, and he would die from it. And so I trust that story, right? I trust his advice differently for knowing his story. So he has this concept that so again, we're answering, what am I actually doing?
What am I doing? Yeah, when I'm listening.
When I'm in that moment and I am hearing a story and I'm realizing that I am about to receive a narrative of suffering, what am I doing? How do I orient myself to that moment? Dr. Dittus has this concept that's so useful to me, and he calls it the ascetic witness or the ascetic listener. So ASCETIC, ascetic. So we know, well, maybe we don't know. What's an ascetic? What's an ascetic person doing? An ascetic person is denying the self of all comfort. So if your listeners have ever read a little church history, have maybe read something about the desert fathers and mothers of the church, these people who moved away from the comforts of community to give and receive from God in the desert, in a cave, without normal groceries, without normal bedding and mattresses. So the idea of asceticism is this denial of self to hear from God. So we would import that concept to this kind of listening, being an ascetic listener. So I am going to consciously deny my own comfort. I'm going to forego my sense of need so that I can move toward this narrative that is making me hurt. So the things that, what would we say is comforting? What are we actually denying ourselves? Well, for many of us, we see pain, it ignites our own pain. And so we go into fixing mode. We want to resource this person, or we want them to read the book that we read about the problem, or we want them to, right, like listen to the sermon series or whatever it is, because not only do we want to alleviate their pain, I want to alleviate my pain. Right. So this resourcing too early, or leveraging or moving even to something awesome and biblical like advocacy, just needs to come at the right time. And it's after the story has been witnessed. So what am I doing? I am acting as the ascetic listener. I am denying myself even the impulse to help. And I am believing a narrative that making space in my world for this story is actually the first intervention. It is the first healing intervention. It's just to join the teller in whatever story needs to come out and be present for it. So that's what I'm doing. And then the way that glorifies God, my goodness. So this takes us into kind of the third movement of what happens when we are doing the science of story support. So if the story is witnessed poorly, the teller is probably driven into more negativity, a sense of, or maybe a story that I can never be joined in my pain. I will always be alone in it. No one can handle it. Even this person whose diploma says she's great at this, even she can't handle it. So if we forego the ascetic listening process, there will be negative outcomes for the teller. If we can hang there, if we can believe that the first powerful intervention is witnessing the story without even moving toward fixing. We can do that later. If we can do that, these extraordinary things become possible for the teller. It's amazing. So two major things. The data would say that there's two enormous things that can change for the teller of the story. One falls in a category called redemptivity. And we're not talking about the gospel here, or at least not directly. In the data, redemptivity means the capacity to narrate suffering with mission and transformation. I'm going to say that again because this is like awesome. So redemptivity, after the story being witnessed, means the capacity to narrate suffering with mission and transformation. So this is a self-focused outcome that if Ashley and Leslie witness my story of pain, I am made in such a way that the next time I tell that story, I might be able to find purpose in what I experience for me, or I might be able to see meaningful change. So mission and transformation. Those facts have not changed, beloved listeners, but our experience of that story can move significantly based on a well-witnessed narrative. And then so that's focused on me. And then the second thing that can change is outward. So the second category of change falls under generativity. And within the theory, that means, that's so cool, concern and commitment for promoting the well-being of others. Concern and commitment for promoting the well-being of others. So when Ashley and Leslie listen to me well, and I'm no longer locked in unreality, I no longer feel like I have proof that no one can listen to what I need to say without it destroying their lives, then I can put my story not only on mission for me, but for other people. And so in the theory, this other focusedness also includes the long-term future. So it is redemptive and generative in the way that it transforms pain into advocacy and measurable outcomes and healing and wholeness and community. None of those things can happen without that first step of well-witnessed narration. So I'll just say one more thing and then I'll make space for where you want to go. So this is from an article by Dan McAdams and Kate McLean. Narrators who find redemptive meaning in suffering and adversity tend to enjoy higher levels of mental health, well-being, and maturity. Like these are measurable outcomes. I'm just going to read it again because it's good enough to read it.
Good stuff.
Narrators who find redemptive meaning in suffering and adversity tend to enjoy higher levels of mental health, well-being, and maturity. So just to touch back to what we were saying about this work belongs to all of us. These are the things that can happen if we're willing to take a hard story while we are drinking our oat milk latte. Have to be in the therapy room. It doesn't have to be in the hospital. It should be, may it be so, Lord, that we just determine that this is how we are going to be for each other. The outcome of this kind of listening means that I might be providing a space that gives meaning to personal suffering and changes the future for a whole bunch of other people that I will never know.
Right.
It's so powerful.
Higher levels of mental health and maturity. Now, why wouldn't we want to participate in that? That's a mic drop, purple pin drop right there. I mean, come on. You know what I think is important, though, that you do speak to right now? Because we all busy people.
We are.
Okay? So don't you think this is the way Leslie would handle it? And I want you to say, no, you're wrong or whatever. Okay. If I don't have the time or the space to hear something like that from somebody, because on a Sunday morning or a Tuesday morning, whatever, somebody's going to want to bolt into my office and I've got 2 minutes and I was supposed to be upstairs doing something. Or let's say we're both moms and we got little kids and I got to go to the grocery store, but then I've got to go pick up this child from blah, blah, blah. I don't have time to hear your story. I'm not
Yes.
belittling your story. I'm not trying to throw you off. How do you think is best to share? I really want to hear what you have to say, seriously.
Mhm.
However, I cannot give it justice right now. I need to go do something and I need to come back. You got
Yes.
30 minutes later, or can we talk about this tomorrow? I mean, because that's going to happen. We can't always be just sitting there waiting for somebody to share the heaviest story of their life.
That's right. I think you just did it beautifully, Leslie.
Yeah.
But here's what it requires to say what you just said.
Mhm.
Baby, I hear something huge is going on with you, and I have to do this other thing right now. Just like you said, here's the link to my calendar scheduler,
Mhm.
or I'm going to be back in my office in 45 minutes.
Mhm.
Or do you want to take a walk together on
Mhm.
Saturday afternoon? Whatever. So just like you said, but I want to recognize that what we must do is slow down in that moment. So this is something that is a hard skill to incorporate into a narrative. If I'm telling myself a story that I am too busy and that my rushing is justified, then I will overrun. I will not make space to slow down even for that 1 minute that it takes to look that person in the eye and say, I just have such a strong sense of how badly you're hurting, and I want to listen well, and I can't right now. So when can we do this? Or would you like to talk to my counterpart, or whatever it may be? So that's huge. We idolize our rush, right? We take a great deal of pride in being overcommitted.
Mhm.
I am super guilty of this. I take it as a compliment when people are like, "Oh, you're great at multitasking." Like, I'm actually horrible at it,
That's what
and
I
I'm
say.
sorry that you think that I am.
Are you kidding me? I mean, I can do it, and you can tell I can do it.
Yes. So here's one other thing that I want to add while we're in this place where we're talking about sort of the democratization of hearing stories well, is that it's really important for us to recognize an aspect of justice in this work. And so this is an intervention that can be adopted and adapted in any community in the world. It would be a tragedy if I made it sound like the only people who can do this kind of thing and are worth doing this kind of thing are privileged Westerners who can get a terminal degree. This is the Lord's mercy to human beings, that he made us this way, that narration can be our freedom, and that it does not require lots of American dollars. It does not require professional licensure.
Mhm.
I y'all were in the session this last time we were at Kerygma, and I called heavily on the work of Bishop Desmond Tutu. And he made this process implicit to healing for an entire nation, to be heard without interruption, without contradiction, and to have that story honored. So it would be a tragedy anytime we make it sound like wellness depends on a person's budget, having space in it for all organic foods and a monthly massage and yoga. That cannot be what we depend on to get to wellness, to get to wholeness and healing. That is not the way of Yahweh. He wants every person to experience wholeness and healing and wellness. And this is one way that we can do it that costs $0. And we can do it for every person should have access to an aesthetic listener.
Yes. I mean, he gave us the skills to communicate. Doesn't matter what language, doesn't matter if you're sitting outside. Yeah, doesn't matter what country, doesn't matter.
Mhm.
None of that.
Yep.
So do you think, I know we've been talking a long time, but do you think that you can talk about how listening to someone else's story makes us sometimes, you just talked about making it inwardly reflect. Well, our story starts changing, or it makes us have to look at ourselves inwardly pretty deep to deal with stuff we got going on. Do you think
Mhm.
you can touch on some of that in the time we have?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're talking about an empathic response. It's normal for when I'm listening to anybody else tell a story it would be impossible for me to not stop my story from lighting up in those places. And sometimes we roll over our own stories because we don't want to recognize them. We'd rather fix this other person's problem. So when we are having that empathic response, something comes alive in me because I listened to someone else. There are, I think, again, more than I could count of loving and ethical responses to myself. I can name 3. So the first one would be to recognize my emotion, perhaps my unresolved emotion, as a loving invitation from God. So this is, again, not something that we can do when we are rushing around. This requires some intentionality, but I think when we have this experience and our own story sort of comes alive and floods us, that we might be tempted to tell ourselves that that's a failure on our part instead of a way that God is continuing to reach for me.
You called that self-condemnation is what you refer to that as, I feel
Yeah.
like.
So that's not the intent. That's not what
Mhm.
the Holy Spirit is bringing alive in us. That's a lie. So if we can, I can ask myself, why am I crying while Ashley's telling me her story? If I can create some honor and recognition of why I am resonating with the story I'm being told, that's part of doing the work ethically to rather than condemn our emotions, to be curious about them and to keep in our thinking that our whole body is telling the story. It's not, those emotions are coming from a place that is perhaps more knowledgeable than our intellect about our past. So recognizing that emotion as like God's welcome for
Mhm.
us. When the emotions are negative, which is usually what we're talking about in my discipline of pastoral care, we would want to situate that experience in an understanding of grieving
Mhm.
that almost all of us, for lots of reasons, one of which is in the United States, we are allergic to grief. Like, push it away instead of making the room that's required to process it.
Mhm.
So maybe recognizing our own losses, resonating with the story we're hearing, and then doing our own narrative work, a process called narrative revision that brings us, it takes a minute to unpack that, but to
Mhm.
find ourselves, I almost said bring ourselves, but of course that's not it. In the community of
Yeah.
listening, of being seen and being known, to arrive at a place where we are in a newly coherent story, that a story is giving us shelter and belonging.
That
And
narrative
again,
revision is amazing. I mean, I know we don't have enough time to talk about that, but I have it all written out. Like, I tried to just take the whole
That's what
I
mine looks
tried to
like.
take the whole thing, and my boxes don't line up and my but narrative revision of our own story, it's you did really good with that, explaining that.
yeah. Well, I'll just say the only way that can happen uh, in a way that's fully healing is to find the place where the story that God is telling is active.
It's the
Yeah.
true story we listen to all the
Yes.
time. Yeah.
Yes.
You gave 4 steps in that empathy in narrative revision.
Mhm.
Tell the story no matter how many times, best done with another person, go back to where you came from kinda thing.
Yes.
You talked about naming the hurt.
Yes.
And I know this is fast and you've got lots of things you could say to it. Grant forgiveness, release the person that hurt you from changing your identity or the person that helped me or made me form this new identity of who I am or who I'm not.
That's right.
And
That's right.
4, renew or release the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll just say, because I always feel like this is a place where sometimes in churches we have not done a very good job of this. But that step 4 that you were just naming, Leslie, and I'll say these are not my ideas. These came from Bishop Tutu. That idea that the final step might be a renewal of relationship, and it also may be the release of that relationship.
Mhm.
I say that just because, especially knowing that I'm imagining, I guess, that most of your listeners are women who want to follow Jesus. And a narrative that we have been given by well-meaning faith leaders is that it is our responsibility to take abuse. And that's where the freedom to release a relationship in a spirit of forgiveness is really, I think it's just really important for people to not conflate renewal and forgiveness with remaining in a situation that is abusive.
Yeah, no.
So I know I'm not going very deep there, but I just want to say that there is room in a faithful life to advocate for self and safety and forgiving perpetrators, but there is not a mandate to be treated as less than imago Dei in any relationship.
And now we know what we're talking about on our next podcast.
Okay.
What do you
I
think,
know.
Ash?
What? Telling you, I'm honored to be in your presence is all I'm saying. Like, because you have so much knowledge, and
Not
then when you
kidding.
talk about this stuff, that's what I was saying when I was sitting there. I'm like, because I have a question for you, and I'm kind of going. It's a little bit of like I statement, right? Because I'm this way, and I know lots of people are that way, and then be in the Christian world. But I think, what do you say to the person? Like I'm one of the world's worst. Okay, like I hold stuff in, I push stuff down, and sometimes it's just because I don't know if it's just genetics, it's past, it's how I grew up, or it's just you get to a point in your life and you go, I want to be that rock solid person for everybody because everybody comes to you and then you're like, and then, I mean, it could be all kinds of things, right? But what do you say to the person? Because we've been talking about listening, but what do you say to the person, the encouragement to the person who should tell their story
Mm.
or is afraid to tell their story?
Ooh.
Do you know what I'm saying? And sometimes too, like if someone is taught like always show the good side of everything or don't talk about the bad stuff. I mean, so what's your encouragement in that aspect? Because I know I've been in conversations with so many that have probably an incredible story, but they're afraid to share, or they think I don't want to put the weight on somebody, I don't want to do that. What's your
So first let me say, I see myself in what you're saying, Ashley. Like it is, there is a way that our helping gifts, whether we're professionals or whatever, can become a way that we keep a distance between ourselves and other people or between ourselves and our own story. So
yeah.
what I would say would depend a lot on my relationship with the person. And I also would want to be careful not to, you're not saying this, but I'm saying I would want to be really careful about the person with the story having agency so that it's the right time. They can tell the story when it's the right time and when it's completely their decision. So you know that feeling of being pressed for more details than you want to give.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's not okay in this space either, especially if there's something dark in there, like some trauma or so we want to respect privacy and agency. But I might say, like if it's you and me, I might say, you know what, Ashley, my really hopeful prayer for you would be that when it's the right time, you share that thing. You decide. And if you ever need somebody to listen, it would be an honor if you chose me. Just something that simple. But the thing that matters is for you and me and the rest of us who use our work to avoid our own story, to get real about that piece first, right? Like it feels good. It feels good to be the one who knows what to do. It feels really powerful to be the one who's trusted. And we said, I can't remember if we'd started recording or not, but I teach so much out of the shepherding metaphor. And the reason that matters is that for all of us who have any kind of responsibility in ministry, paid, unpaid, professional, lay ministry, all of us who are following Jesus, we are always sheep first. We are always equally needful of the great shepherd of the other people who are following him. I am unable to meet the needs that only he can meet. And I am in danger of who knows what, probably abuse of power, if I imagine that I don't have the same kind of weakness and mortality and need for meaningful relationship that every other person does. So that's where pastoral care is predicated on the metaphor of the sheep and the shepherd. That's where it all starts. That's where it all ends. And there's only one shepherd that we're all following. And sometimes he is kind enough to designate or delegate a little shepherding to one of we mortals. But if I'm out of balance there of recognizing my total dependence on this guy, I will be unhealthy. I will do harm. I will burn out. Those are some of what I would say, probably.
Pretty
Pretty
dang
good.
good.
Yeah.
Hey, have you ever read the book The Way of the Shepherd?
No, I'm aware of it, but I haven't read that
I've
one.
not read it either, and somebody told me today I should read that. But it's not as much of a counseling type book or anything like that, because I was talking to a lady today about coaching, wellness coaching.
Yeah.
And she said it was a leadership book because it's based on the shepherd, but it just sounds like what we're talking about right here, the way of the shepherd.
Mm-hmm. There's in the early church, in the first few centuries after Jesus' earthly life, the emblem of the shepherd with the sheep draped over his shoulders was their common imagery. Like I'm wearing a cross on my hand, on my right hand, to remind me whatever I'm doing with my hands, it better be honoring to the guy who died on this thing, right? In the early church, the beloved image was of the shepherd, because he's the guy who's coming back for you,
Amen.
even after you die. So that positionality within the message and the metaphor of shepherding, I think, is a great way to safeguard exempting ourselves from these processes of healing and discipleship.
We could sit here and talk to you for hours, Eva. I mean, like,
Yes.
I feel like people are gonna be listening. They're like, "Can't." It's only an hour or an hour. Like, can we do more of this? So, I mean, I feel like we're gonna have to do more because you have a way with being able to share it. You can understand it, and you have so much knowledge. So, and I can only imagine like the conversations that you've had. So, for you to be able to take it and to be able to distribute and share it with others and tell the stories to others, till they gain something from that. I mean, that's just a beautiful thing. Good for you.
Thank you for saying so. And
Rigma, I mean, it was genius when I thought storying. Wow, everybody's got their own. And
Yeah.
and I know it's not a new concept, but it's new to me.
yeah,
So it was so amazing. So I can't wait to continue learning in this. And I think that you'll help us as we have questions and are learning more about this.
sounds fun to me.
Absolutely.
I love y'all. I just have such a resonant sisterhood with you.
Oh, don't
Right.
worry. There will be more. I do have a question for you. Okay, so we usually do this at the end of the podcast, and you know where I'm going with this, Leslie. I would love to know what you have to say. Fearless 271 is based off the verse, Psalm 27:1. We always ask people, we're like, what does the word fearless mean to you in your own words? Like, there's no right or wrong answer. But like, when you hear the word fearless, what comes to mind? I would love to know what you have to say about that.
I think what comes to mind for me is that fearless doesn't maybe for me mean that I'm not afraid. It means that I know to put my fears with the shepherd. Right? Like, it's not a failure to be afraid or anxious. Anxiety is not a failure. It's an invitation to look at him, to follow his voice, and know that he knows where I'm going. I am not responsible. And that even if my heart is beating 280 beats a minute because I am really seriously nervous about what's happening, that fearless for me would be in that moment of even terror, just eyes on him. Where are you? Where are we going?
So
I
good.
knew she was going to have a really good.
Yeah, I mean,
we were both out of our seats anyway with the very first comment. So that was,
yes. Yes.
you have a gift, Eva. You have a
Oh,
gift.
you're so nice.
Totally do.